Well, from the glorious heights of space down to the grubby infantry battle in the jungles of Vietnam. What I want to talk about is the use of close air support by infantry in a counterinsurgency campaign in a jungle environment. Most firefights in Vietnam were at very close range, about 15 to 20 metres. About 80% of all firefights were over that range. The duration of engagement was very short, only about 10 minutes. Again, about 80% of all firefights lasted about 10 minutes or less. Average Australian strength in combat was about 25 men for a full platoon, but by 1969 and through to 1971, the Australian Task Force was operating mainly in half platoon patrols, numbering about 12 to 15 men. So very small firefights. Average enemy strength, again, was very small, about 6 men or less. The problem was that although these fights were at close range, short duration against small groups of enemy by small groups of Australians, every now and then an Australian patrol could encounter a much bigger force, or a force that was located in a bunker system. And bunker systems were nasty battles. A range of engagement for a bunker system battle was pretty much the same as any other battle, about 15 to 20 metres. The duration ballooned out. They lasted 30 minutes or more generally. They were very hard fights. They required application of heavy indirect fire support very often, including air-delivered weapons, close air support. So what did all this mean? It meant that most contacts didn't need close air support and heavy indirect fire support, but those that did require that were generally big fights or bunker system attacks. And bunker systems gave the enemy protection against those heavy weapons, including air-delivered weapons. This is what a bunker looks like. This particular bunker has had a bomb or an artillery shell land near it, and it's been stripped of most of its camouflage. But you can see in the background some of the jungle that still remains intact, and you can imagine what this would be like in that jungle. Very heavily camouflaged, very difficult to see. Infantry patrols often got to within about 10 metres of these bunkers without being able to see them. They were often connected with tunnels, crawl trenches, and spider holes. They had spider holes dug along the trenches. The enemy would pop out of those, fire a few shots, and then duck down, crawl to some other position and start firing again. So very difficult environments in which to fight the enemy. So I want to talk about some of the problems with the application of air support by the infantry, from the infantry's point of view. The first problem I want to talk about is too few fire controllers. We heard a bit about fire controllers earlier. But in Vietnam, most infantry battalions, particularly from 1969 through to 1971, in the latter stages of the war, were operating in many half-platoon patrols. An infantry battalion could normally mount about 26 to 28 such patrols. They would spread out over the country in an attempt to find the enemy, to bring the enemy to battle. But there are only 8 fire controllers provided to support the application of heavy indirect fire support or close air support. Those 8 fire controllers were 4 artillery forward observer teams provided by the field battery that was supporting the battalion, and 4 mortar fire controllers that came from the battalion's own mortar platoon. So therefore there are about 18 patrols that don't have a fire controller. And the law of buttered toast says that the contact where you need close air support and heavy indirect fire support will be with one of those patrols that doesn't have a fire controller. When that happened, the patrol commander could have his hands very full. He's trying to fight the battle on the ground, but he's also trying to coordinate artillery and mortar fire, and he's also talking to aircraft overhead that want to join the battle. There's one platoon commander in Vietnam recorded that at one point in a battle he had 11 aircraft on his command net wanting to talk to him while he was fighting the battle. He could have a forward air controller, dust off helicopters, maybe a couple of those, fighter ground attack aircraft circling overhead, a fixed wing gunship perhaps, helicopter gunships, a command and control ship with the battalion commanding officer in it, telling the patrol commander how to fight his battle on the ground. All of them want to talk to the patrol commander while he's fighting that battle, while he's trying to manoeuvre his force, while he's trying to get the best out of his soldiers to defeat the enemy. And he's doing this, he's trying to coordinate these aircraft and the artillery and mortar support that he's receiving while people are shooting at him. It's a tall ask, particularly if he doesn't have a fire controller to do that for him. Problems with air support number 2 from the infantry's point of view, identifying the target. It's easy in the Middle East, it's difficult in the jungle. This is just a satellite image of Fallujah. In Fallujah in Iraq in November 2004 was a major battle, everybody in the chain of command was issued with a high-resolution image of Fallujah city with all of the buildings numbered. So an infantry commander could get on the radio and say, I'm in building number 156 and I'm taking fire from building number 724, and everybody in the command chain knew exactly where he was, where the friendlies were, and they knew exactly the building that was causing the problem and needed to be destroyed. So the patrol commander, the neighbouring units, the neighbouring infantry units, the armoured vehicle down the street, the artillery battery that was 3 kilometres away, the helicopter gunships overhead, the fighter ground attack aircraft overhead, and the command and control aircraft above that all knew precisely where the friendly forces were and precisely which building needed to be destroyed. Easy, simple, very easily to coordinate. Not so easy in the jungle. In Fallujah and in Iraq, infantry units were sometimes providing 8-figure and even 10-figure grid references to give their location. In the jungle, you might be lucky to know which grid square you're in. Very difficult to coordinate land operations, ground operations with close air support. The problems with identifying the target include trying to see the target through triple canopy jungle. It's not easy. Enemy camouflage on top of that. And there's a problem of identifying friend from foe. In Vietnam, the way that we identified our position to aircraft overhead was by using smoke grenades. You'd pop a smoke grenade, the smoke would take some time to find its way up through the jungle canopy to eventually break through and locate you for the aircraft and the forward air controller overhead. The other alternative was to use a marker balloon. That was a balloon about that big, bright orange. Again, that would have to be steered up through the jungle to try and get it out above the canopy so that the aircraft above could see it. While you're doing that, of course, people are shooting at you. So again, dangerous and difficult to achieve. At night time, we had a strobe light. Strobe light was about the size of a pack of cards. You flick it on and it's got this pulsing light. But again, as soon as you do that, every enemy soldier within about 50 metres wants to shoot at you. So very difficult to do, very dangerous to do. There was a difficulty in identifying friend from foe. We've identified 53 incidents, friendly fire incidents, that were infantry on infantry incidents. But for them, the loss ratio per incident was about 1.6 casualties. Air on infantry incidents are much fewer, only 5 incidents that we've been able to find. But the loss ratio per incident is much higher. So although there are relatively few incidents, when they occurred, they tended to cause much heavier casualties. simply because of the sorts of ordnance that the aircraft were delivering. In one particular case, when helicopter gunships brassed up an infantry patrol, Wing Commander Hibben gave this advice. I think that reflects that there was a lack of understanding about how the infantry fought on the ground. You can't stand there with your arms extended, you can't lie spread-eagled. The enemy is only 15 metres away, they're throwing hand grenades at you, they're shooting machine guns at you, they're firing RPGs at you. You can't do this sort of thing. So there's a disconnect between the way the Air Force tended to look at how the infantry battle was fought on the ground, and maybe that one of the things we need to think about is providing an opportunity for people who are involved in delivering air support to get into battles or to go on operations with infantry patrols to just see how it's done from the infantryman's point of view. Problems number 3, safety distances for own troops. Initial contact, as I said, occurs in about 15 to 20 metres range. It's far too close to apply heavy air support. That means that the friendlies have to withdraw from the point of contact. But the enemy is not dumb, they're not stupid. In Vietnam, the enemy had been at this game for decades. They'd fought the Japanese, they'd fought the French, they'd fought the South Vietnamese, they'd fought the Americans, and now they were fighting the Australians. They'd been at it for decades. They knew what we meant when we withdrew from their contact. They knew what was going to happen next. They could hear the jets overhead, they could see the FAC. They knew that they were going to receive an airstrike. So they withdrew too. So if an airstrike is put in on the position, it lands on an empty battlefield. Safety distances for own troops were these: 100 metres, a very, very minimum safety distance for soft loads, napalm and cluster bomb units, about 100 metres. Hard loads such as bombs to 750 pounds, 250 metres. Gunships could provide 7.62 and 20mm cannon fire to about 15 metres. So they could be applied to the enemy while you're in contact, but they were useless against enemy in bunkers. They didn't have any real effect on the bunkers. The other two, bombs, napalm and cluster bomb units, might have been effective against the bunkers, but you have to withdraw out of the vicinity of the contact before you can apply them. And that gives the enemy the opportunity to withdraw as well. This is an extract from a report that was written by one of the COs, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Scott of 3RAR in Vietnam, about the problem that was faced by infantry on the battlefield. So what Scott is pointing to there is the reluctance of the infantry to withdraw from contact with the enemy. Often the infantry battalion has spent 3 or 4 weeks in the jungle patrolling, trying to find the enemy, to then turn around and break contact and withdraw for a mission, an airstrike that may or may not hit the target. And even if it hits the target, may or may not do any damage to the bunkers. Was not a very didn't have a very positive outlook. Problem number 4 from the infantry's point of view, lack of destructive effect. Bombing was sometimes highly effective, but sometimes not. It was highly effective against enemy troops in the open, above ground. Very effective against them. But it sometimes missed the target. It sometimes resulted in tree bursts, and even near misses didn't destroy bunkers and damage or injure enemy inside bunkers. The Battle of Khe Sanh was fought in February 1968. It lasted about a month. The American base in Khe Sanh, up near the demilitarised zone and the Laotian border, was surrounded by elements of the NVA, a couple of divisions, in fact, for a very long time, and the relatively small garrison in Khe Sanh held out primarily because of the effects of air power and the use of air power to hold the enemy at bay. There were hundreds, literally hundreds, of B-52 strikes put in on the enemy, and there were thousands of smaller close air support missions called against the enemy. After the Viet Cong or Vietnamese forces withdrew, North Vietnamese army withdrew, the American military sent out patrols to do a study of how those air missions had affected the situation, the enemy positions. And they produced a very lengthy report. I've extracted just a couple of very minor statements from them here. But you can see that the theme of this report is that it's clear that in order to destroy a bunker, a bomb must hit the bunker, penetrate it, and explode on the inside. And at the bottom there, the NVA bunker withstood anything but a direct hit by bombs or artillery. The infantry wanted, ideally, for these bunkers to be completely eliminated, of course. Tree bursts were a problem. The target, the trajectory of the bombs or other air-delivered weapons might pass through the canopy where the bombs would detonate perhaps up to 30-40 metres from the intended target. It was particularly a problem if you and your infantry patrol was underneath where the bombs hit the tree canopy. There was a B-52 strike in an enemy bunker system in the Long High Hills where, in February 1970. And as a result of that strike, the 8th Battalion was ordered to conduct a bomb damage assessment, and Major Clunies Ross, the second in command of 8 RAR, went into the bunker system to see what had happened, what effect this B-52 strike had had. And this is what he found. The key line there is some bombs had dropped alongside bunkers, but none had caved in. There was a tendency, I think, in Vietnam for the Air Force to make rather exaggerated claims about the effectiveness of its air power. In 1969, there was an exchange of letters between General Stuart Graham, who was the Deputy Chief of the General Staff and who'd been a former commander of the Australian Task Force in Vietnam, and his colleague, General Hay, who was then the current Commander, Australian Forces Vietnam. So he was in Saigon. In Saigon. Both men were very experienced commanders. Both men were very familiar with the war as it was being conducted on the ground. And this is what Stuart Graham wrote to General Hay. Hay responded later saying this: clearly both men were rather sceptical about the effects of Air Force bombing, RAF bombing. They thought that the reports were considerably over-egged. But what does this mean for us? I think it means this: those who deliver heavy fire support tend to have an inflated view of its effectiveness. Those who receive heavy indirect fire support tend to have a deflated view of its effectiveness. And therefore we should only accept the evidence that's provided through rigorous bomb damage assessments. Okay, I just want to end with some thoughts about the future, and I'm sort of putting myself out on a limb here because I don't know much about the technology that's the wonderful technology that's now being used. But these are my thoughts about the future of delivery of close air support to infantry operations in a jungle environment, particularly in a counterinsurgency campaign. I believe there won't be enough JTACs. I think that we're likely to find ourselves, in the infantry that is, operating in small unit patrols, searching for the enemy so that we can bring the enemy to contact and have a fight. That means we'll be breaking down into those small groups again, about 15 men. So we're going to need about 26 JTACs per battalion. I don't think we've got anywhere near that number. GPS may not work. Triple canopy jungle, tropical downpours, steep-sided valleys may all interfere with the usefulness and effectiveness of GPS, and therefore the infantry location may not be known exactly. Laser designation of targets. If a JTAC is going to designate targets, he's going to have to do it from about 15 metres range while people are shooting at him. I like these illustrations that you see in books about the interconnections between JTACs and aircraft overhead and so on. They all seem to show the designation of a target over a distance of about 1 kilometre by somebody who's comfortably lying down, pointing their laser designator at the target with complete visibility of the target some way off. In the jungle, it's going to be about 15 metres and people are going to be shooting at you. I think the enemy will continue to adopt some of the tactics that he used in Vietnam, future enemy. I think they'll continue to operate as close to us as they can. They'll hug our belts, as the Vietnamese used to call it. That way they get us so close to us that we can't apply heavy indirect fire support on them without also injuring our own people. They'll use bunkers and caves. They'll use hit and run attacks where they make a sudden attack and then withdraw into the jungle and disperse. They'll use GPS jammers. I think scoring a direct hit on a bunker will continue to be extremely difficult. It'll be difficult to find them in the first place because they're well camouflaged and under a triple canopy jungle or dense vegetation. Heavy jungle will cause tree bursts, and that will be a limit on the effectiveness of the fire. The enemy will tend to confuse us by building dummy bunker systems and by putting dummy bunkers inside real bunker systems. Some other insurgent anti-air tactics that I think might happen. The enemy will conduct anti-air ambushes. He'll oversupply his bunkers. He'll have his civilian assistants dig bunker systems for him, and he'll develop an oversupply of them so that no individual bunker system is important to him. No individual bunker system needs to be held so strongly that he must fight a battle to keep it. He simply upstakes and moves to another one if we threaten him. He'll build deeper bunkers if air power starts to improve its effect on him. He'll build deeper bunkers. He'll use indirect fire attacks on air bases to destroy air assets on the ground. He'll operate predominantly at night. He'll make maximum use of natural caves, and to interfere with our helicopter operations, he'll use mining and he'll erect obstacles in natural LZs. So those are just some thoughts, and I look forward to my lynching later, and any questions?